My life flows on in endless song above earth's lamentation. I
All right,
hear the
let me start
river
with a story.
rolling.
This is a story of James, was his name. And he was a city boy, a city slicker from New York. And he went, probably in his late teens, he lost his father and then soon after his mother. So he's an orphan. And he tried school for a while, but he decided pretty quickly that he would like to go see the world. And he thought, what I'm going to do is start, because he had no money, I'm going to start by going to California. And I'm going to get rich with the gold that I hear is out there. And then I'm going to go visit India and England and Europe and just have a great time. He was an adventurer at heart, but didn't have a lot of experience. Well, he did cross the plains, and he landed in this strange place called Salt Lake City. And he was smitten by Salt Lake. He thought it was a very strange but interesting place. He had heard terrible things about these Mormons that lived there, but when he got there, he was favorably impressed, and he thought, they're not bad. And pretty quickly, he found that he had been wrong. And he ended up joining the Mormon Church within just a month or so of when he had arrived in Salt Lake, and he decided to stay. He wasn't gonna, that changed his plans. He decided not to go on into California. And instead, this Mormon prophet, Brigham Young, sent him down to this town in the southern Utah Territory named Parowan. And he ended up in Parowan, down in a fort. The Indians were still fairly active at the time, and he was in the fort. But this adventurous heart just wouldn't leave him alone, and so he decided he was going to go explore the mountains. And there's some beautiful mountains. I don't know if you've been down to the mountains around Parowan. But he being a city slicker, he was full of energy, but not full of a lot of wisdom. And he took off one morning and climbed a mountain. And about halfway up, he realized his folly. He didn't bring any water. So he's thirsty. And he gets to the top of this peak. He looks over the whole area. It's beautiful. And he's very thirsty. And he says, I need to get some liquid, or I'm not going to make it back home. So he finds a cactus, and he uses his knife, and he kind of cuts off all the spines on it, and he tears it open, and he chews on the flesh of the cactus, and it just keeps, some of it goes in. He tries to swallow it, but it kind of sticks, the mucilage is sticking to the part that's still in his mouth, and all he's doing is gagging, and it doesn't taste very good. So at some point, he just starts to he describes it as like a necromancer pulling this magic rope out of his throat forever and ever. It just keeps coming, and he's choking and gagging, and he finally gets it out, and he sits down and laughs until he cries. And he thinks, I've got to find a faster way home. So he jumps up, and he starts down a riverbed, and he figures this is going to, if I follow this creek bed, it'll get me down. So he goes down, and he kind of jumps from one rock to the next and hops down this valley and makes a jump, and it's about a 10-foot drop, and he lands on this ledge, and his next jump, had he taken it, would have been a 150-foot drop. And it's straight down, and there are sharp rocks at the bottom. Some trees are off there. So he obviously turns around, he decides he's going to climb back up, but as he looks at the wall behind him, it's a sheer, smooth 10-foot surface, and he cannot get back up that way. He scratches, he takes his shoes off, he licks his hands, tries everything he can to get some purchase on that wall, and he cannot do it. He cannot get up. So he looks, goes back, kind of shinnies up to the edge, and leans over, looks again, and he sees that about 30 feet away and about 40 feet down is the top of a pine tree. And other than that, it's sharp rocks, and he knows if he lands on those rocks, he's dead. He cannot shinny back up the wall, and the ledge ends on both sides. So he thinks and he studies. Out of his pack, he pulls. This is how practical he was. He was an artist, and so he didn't bring any water, but he brought pencil and paper, and he drew the scene that was there, and it was beautiful. And then he pondered, and as he pondered, he thought, I have two choices. I can stay here and starve, probably die of thirst actually before that. Nobody knows where he's gone, so he would probably have an unknown death. Or I could try and jump to that pine tree, the top of which is 40 feet down and probably 30 feet up. But if I miss that pine tree, or if I'm, chopped up by the branches, I'm dead. And if I miss the pine tree, I'm dead. But if I stay, I'm dead. So he pondered and he thought, he had received a brand new convert to the church from Salt Lake, and he had received his patriarchal blessing, and it promised all kinds of wonderful things. And he thought, well, I can't see that I've done anything so bad that I should not deserve those things, so I must live. He had a simple kind of a faith, so he thought, okay, I'm going to jump. So he gets against the wall, and he has about 3 steps till he gets to the edge of the thing, and then he's got to launch off into space. So he does 3 steps, and he gets to the edge. His knees turn to gel, and he just kind of plumps down. He cannot make himself do it. It's just, there's something in his psyche, even though his brain wants to do it, he can't do it. So he sits down and prays. And he tells God, I've tried to do your will, and I'm stuck in a bad place, and I need your help. And he felt peace, enough peace that he tried again. He went to the back of the wall, and he took those 3 steps, but this time his legs were like iron, he said. Iron sinews. He just had strength, that he couldn't imagine, couldn't believe. He took those 3 steps and leapt off into space. And the next thing he remembers is holding a branch in each hand of that pine tree and dangling there without a scratch. Nothing on his arms. His hands are fine. And he's dangling there, and he shimmies in and gets to this thing. And it's about 110-foot tall pine tree. So he's got to climb down quite a ways. Toward the bottom, it's probably 30 feet. The bottom branch is maybe 30 feet off the ground, so he's got a little bit of a drop. And he drops, and he's safe. And he walks home. James was named James Henry Martineau, my dad's great-grandpa. I don't know who I'd be if it hadn't have been for that leap of faith. It's a leap of life or death, and to take it staggers the imagination. Who cares? Why does it matter? Fascinating story. We preserve our past really for one primary reason, and that's to fortify our future. But I want to talk today about what we do for our children or grandchildren and or ourselves by the preservation of particularly the stories of our past. Why does that matter? Well, children need their ancestors. We give children a sense of belonging, who they are, where they fit in the world, as they hear these stories, as they understand about your life, about your parents' lives, about your grandparents' lives, and further back. It gives them confidence to overcome challenges. I recently made a documentary about my mother, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment, but I made a documentary about my mom, and in the process interviewed several of my siblings, my dad and others. But I was interviewing my sister, And at one point in the interview, she said, you know, I was serving a mission in Taiwan, and I was so discouraged. And then, as I was praying about it, I started thinking, well, wait a minute. My dad served a mission faithfully. My grandpa served 20 years. My and one of our ancestors is Parley P. Pratt. And she said, you know, they've all done it. They served a mission, and they had hard times, but they did it. She said, I suddenly realized if they could do it, that was my heritage, then I could do it too. It gives us confidence that we can handle challenges. A good heritage is like momentum. If you've ever seen a flywheel go, it takes a lot to get the flywheel started. You start moving it, it's kind of hard to get going, but because it's heavy, it's a big weight. But if it's got minimal friction, and you get that going, once you get it going, it's hard to stop. It just keeps going. And as you pass on to your children and to their children and to their children, a good heritage, it just builds on itself. Generation after generation. It's momentum. It gets going. It's a less painful way to learn life's lessons. And it's, our ancestors, I have to say on this last one, but I have come to know that those who have gone before are watching out for those who come later. I had, in preparing for a family reunion we did recently, I prayed to really understand why are we doing this. And the feeling that I had was, this is about binding. Being bound to each other, those of us who are still alive here and together and part of the family, but also binding us back in the generations. And then, as strong a prompting as I've ever had, I had the feeling that I should make a documentary, a video about my mother. And the reason is she died in 2008, remarkable woman, amazing woman, but the last 5 years of her life she had dementia. And most of our children, much less grandchildren, either never knew her or just knew her when she was cranky. And that was just not a memory that I felt peaceful about leaving in their hearts. So and here's the part I wanted to share. As I felt that impression and then began working on it, because it had to be done in about 6 weeks, and most of these, a full-length documentary tends to take a couple of years, actually, if you do it right. So it was all very compressed. I just felt her there again and again, helping with the process. And I've had many other very sacred, very personal experiences relative to ancestors, being engaged in my daily living, not just helping me find names like you hear about so often with genealogy, but helping me through my own personal struggles. So how do you share this? How do you make the connections? I want to talk to you about stories. Some very recent neurological research shows these results. Stories stimulate the regions of our brain, the same regions of our brain as actual experiences do. The exact same ones. Your olfactory, your visual sense, your feelings, as well as your feelings, your emotions. All of those things are those neurons are fired, so much so that very often after hearing a story for many years, children think they were there. You may have had that experience, that the kids go, you remember when we, whatever? And their older sibling says, you weren't even born. You weren't even there. Really? But you experience life as powerfully through stories as you do experiencing it through your senses. It touches those very same things. Stories are a shared experience. So the teller and the listener both end up having an ownership if you become engaged, you probably will remember the story of James Henry Martineau. You may not remember his name, but that crazy guy who jumped off a cliff and went 40 feet down and 30 feet out and made it, you'll probably remember that. Partly because we engage when when we're telling stories. The other thing about stories is that you can plant in other people's hearts and minds ideas, emotions, thoughts. It's actually a little bit dangerous, a tool, because it's so powerful. Advertisers use it. They tell you stories to convince you that they have this wonderful product. And it essentially injects into your experience an experience. You can plant the seeds of thoughts. But beyond that, why tell family stories? There are people whose names have not been lovingly spoken for 100 years or longer that matter. People that really have influenced your experience, your characteristics, your family life, and they matter, but they're being lost from our minds and from our hearts. And that's one reason to tell these stories, to speak lovingly of those who have really built the foundation on whose shoulders we stand. We and our children get strength and courage, as we said, a sense of belonging. And most importantly is, truth is better than fiction. There are some amazing stories that you will discover, if you haven't already, about your ancestors. I'm not going to spend much time about how you find those stories. I will just mention briefly that as a source of stories and also a place to put those stories, because you ought to write them down when you get them, FamilySearch.org now, the LDS Church's site, not only has room for the raw facts and the information that they've had for a long time, but they now have a section called Memories. And you can post pictures, and you can post recordings, and you can post stories and documents. You could put, a PDF document of maybe a census place that you found this information. But my favorite section is the stories, because people are posting them now, and you can go out and read them, and it puts feeling behind these families, these people. That's the go ahead if you read. Did you have a comment? Oh, okay. Most of the rest of the time, I'm gonna spend on what do you do with those stories when you find them. So let's presume you found them. Okay. Now what? Well, what kind of stories? Family lore? That's about you and your family, people that they know. I'll just tell you a really brief one here. We have 7 children. I think at the time we had probably 4. We were living in Michigan, and we decided we were going to go take a camping trip, go south. And on the way south, we were stopping various places. We stopped at the state park in Ohio. And if you've been back to the Midwest, it's green and it's gorgeous, beautiful place. And we camped for the night and had a great time. And the next morning, we, were packing up, and our 2 oldest must have been 4 and 3. The oldest one's a girl, the second one's a boy. Went over to the bathrooms there to use the bathroom and whatever, brush their teeth, whatever they were doing that morning. And so we were putting the tent away, and just as we were doing that, this thunderstorm just exploded over our heads, and lightning was coming everywhere. It was frightening. And plus the water, I couldn't see from me to you just for the rain. It was just coming in buckets, as they say. And with all of the thunder, and the lightning was hitting, and the thunder was almost instantaneous because it was right there with us. We were worried. We stuffed the other kids and all this stuff in the car, but we were worried about the 2 children over in this bathroom, all by themselves in the middle of this booming thunder. So we drove over there, couldn't even, didn't dare make the 10-foot dash from the edge to the door because of the lightning that was coming down. And it finally let up just enough that we got over and got in there, worried about these children and the trauma they must be suffering. And they were playing, happily playing. And we were delighted. When we sat down and talked to them, though, Sarah, our oldest, said that they had been really scared when the first lightning and thunder hit. And then, so she told Joseph, let's pray. So they knelt together in this bathroom, all alone in the middle of the woods, and prayed. And they heard a voice say, just wait here for your mom and dad. And she said, so we did. It was very simple faith, just wait here for your mom and dad. That's all that it took. And that has become part of our family lore. We can talk about that in family home evenings, and they remember it, they share their experiences. We've all had family circumstances, family experiences that are meaningful in some way. Remember that time that we, stayed till midnight canning peaches, and and then we ran out of gas, propane, and we had to do it on the stove, and it smoked up the house, whatever. Our dearly departed is another one. Remembering those that we know personally or that the others have known personally. So my mother, for instance, learning about your legacy, going further back and telling those ancestral stories. When and where do you do it? Here's some ideas, over dinner, family reunions, bedtime, etc. But what I'll basically say is, do it all the time. Do it constantly. You can weave these stories into family reunions, into conversations over food, into visits from the grandkids. I like this picture because these two little fellas are, listening with rapt attention while Grandma is telling stories. And it happens. It happens. It's amazing. If you'll just simply say, I want to tell you a story. The little ones go, really? And they go sit down. And they want to hear about it. It's simple. It's really that simple. We make assignments. We'll have a family reunion and we'll say, I need you to look up, James Henry Martineau. And I want you to look up Glenn Calhoun Haynie. And your assignment is to come back and tell us about it. In fact, at every meal during a family reunion, before we have the opening prayer on the food, got to do it before the food, because if you do it after the food, nobody's going to be listening. But you start right before the prayer, and that person comes up and does their little 4-minute report. Here's what I learned, and we do it in creative ways sometimes. My suggestion is the rising generation has a relatively short attention span, and you need to be able to tell it to them quick and in ways that are accessible to them. I could have written a book about my mother. I still may. But the feeling I had was make a video. And now it's on YouTube. And now my great-grandkids someday can, what they say about everything that, whatever goes on the internet stays on the internet? That's awesome. If you put it, something worthwhile out there. Videos, dance, music. I'll share with you a song that my youngest daughter wrote in one of these assignments. It comes a little later. Using tangible objects. Here's a hat that belonged to your grandpa. Let me tell you about your grandpa. The tangible object sort of connects you. Rings, a gun, an apron, just things that are real and tangible. Ancestor skits and videos. This is a fun activity when you're getting together in a reunion kind of setting. You have to assign this in advance, but you get the groups a video camera, and your kids and grandkids will know more than you do about how to do this. But don't worry about it. They can probably do it with their iPhone. They can videotape the thing, and they probably have an app to edit it right there on the iPhone. So Don't worry about it. You don't have to sweat the details. But you make an assignment and say, you're in charge of making a video about whoever. And so just kind of like, it's in conjunction with assigning an ancestor. And then they go and then we're going to have a video contest. So that you introduce a little competition, and that gets exciting. And they act it out, and they use made up props, and people laugh together when we see it. But we also learn stories. We start telling stories to each other. Reunion sharing time. I just have to share our sharing time. We have a tradition that goes back 3 generations to my mother's 4 generations. Well, it depends where you start. To my mother's grandparents, when they had reunions, they would have essentially a testimony meeting. We've converted it to sharing time because it's not just in a testimony meeting you're focused on, in an LDS setting, what you know about the church or the prophets or whatever. It's kind of a strictly spiritual thing and not supposed to be a travel log. This is also about family. And so when we had this last reunion where I did the video about my mom, a lot of people were talking about their memories of my mom. That was part of the sharing time. And we shed a lot of tears in those meetings. There are times of a lot of emotion and peace. It's a sweet time. But kind of starting that tradition of a sharing time can be a powerful tool. So how do you do it? Well, first of all, my father, who's going to be 90 in March of next year, and is still in pretty good shape. He's still pretty spry, but he's kind of a serious fella, especially to the great-grandchildren. They don't see him as anything playful. I love this photo. This is my dad with his tongue sticking out to the side, but they're posing, in a playful way. And this is a wonderful photo for us to share. We'll pull out the albums, we'll start talking about it. I'll say, this is my dad, and they'll say, what? That's Grandpa? No. Custom storybooks. For Christmas this year, I've decided to, and I'm only partway through, but I brought you a sample and I'll pass it around. I've decided to write a book for each of our 10 grandchildren, actually 11, because there's one going to be born the first week in December. They can read it to him later. And in it are child-level stories, because my grandkids are 6 and under, that their parents can read to them or they can read on their own with a little picture. And I'm going to try and include one for each grandchild, and you'll see why in a second. So there will be 11 stories, but let me just pass it around. Oh, just one quick thing. I will later put a binding on it, but if you're going to make a book, a really quick and easy way to do binding is to take an awl. So you print it and then kind of cut it and lay it out. But you take an awl or a nail or even a drill would work if you have a real tiny thing, and just punch these holes. And dental floss works beautifully. It's very strong. I just took a really large needle and kind of went back and forth, back the other way, and then I'll be gluing a cover on this, and it will be thicker. But an example of custom storybooks for the kids. Ancestors photos, we talked about visit and photograph family places. Just took my dad back to the place of his birth in Colonia Pacheco in the mountains of Chihuahua, Mexico this summer. And it was a powerful experience for me. I was taking pictures at grave sites, visiting home sites, feeling the spirits of those who were there before. This is a wonderful thing to take a little family trip and go visit. Take your kids to familysearch.org, ancestry.com, that kind of thing. I mentioned Pioneer Dolls. I'm just going to share with you the other part of this Christmas gift. I decided to make and these are really simple to make. If you want to find a recipe for them, online. It's you just go to Google and say how to make a nettie doll, Nettie, a nettie doll. But they take rag strips. I went down to DI and bought some sheets and just tore them up, and it tells you kind of how to do it. But for my granddaughters, and we have only 7 out of our 10 are girls. And then I decided I was going to make some other pioneer thing, but I decided that actually the nettie doll, if I just kind of split the skirt, I could tie these two at the legs, and I had to do some fandangling to figure out how to do the overalls for it. But the idea is going to be that each of these will. So this might be for Brooklyn, and it might be her great-great-grandmother, Gerda Alma Hendrickson, is who that doll represents. And again, it's something tangible. I'm looking for her to be able to, love the doll, but the real point is for her to look up Gerda Alma Hendrickson in this little book that I'm sending with them and learn her story. So just an example. My dad's dad, the fellow that was in the middle of that picture, my dad's dad was named Glenn Calhoun Haynie, and he was a cowboy, the real thing. He lived in northern Mexico, and he ran a couple of thousand head of cattle over his father's land and over other rangeland. And starting when he was very small, he was able to ride horses, shoot a gun. And so I assigned Rachel, our youngest, before she took off to BYU Hawaii. But I wanted you to get a sense of the kind of things that, the creative things that kids do if you turn them loose and say, you need to report on Grandpa, whatever. So she tells several stories about Glenn Calhoun Haynie. It's a little hard to hear her words, so I've scrolled them up on the screen here.
Clipped on up the mountain, startled back in fear.
told you about family songs and the one about the sunny San Juan. At reunions, we sang it, but
It was by chance that we met.
I recorded it so that they could keep it.
By a low-spreading pinyon tree, and a voice with a charm lingers yet in my mind. 'Twas hushed at the sight of me. There's a charm in the wilds of the sunny San Juan, a love for its beautiful climb. Oh, my mind wanders back every day of the year, and I live for that happy time. On the sunny San Juan, where the coyote...
I'll skip on. This next one is the first couple of minutes of the documentary that I did for my mom.
I couldn't count how many times people would say to me, "What's it like to be Gerda's daughter?"
But many people over the years have talked to me about my mother and their interactions with my mother and how much they loved her and what she did for them.
The year was 1928. There was nothing particularly extraordinary about the baby. They named her Gerda after her maternal grandmother. She turned out to be pretty, smart, and talented. She was in most ways, however, fairly ordinary. Though her family was not rich, their lives were abundant with love, laughter, learning, and homemade fun. By society's standards, she was unremarkable. She never became famous or wealthy, but she excelled in the things that mattered most and last the longest. Like the virtuous woman of old, her children arise up and call her blessed, and her husband also, and he prays with her. The positive influence is still felt in the lives of the thousands who she loved and served. But the true legacy of her life is most pronounced in the lives of her growing posterity. Ironically, many of them never really knew or even met her. This story is particularly for them, the rising generation, to give them a glimpse of this ordinary girl who accomplished extraordinary things and left them a heritage of hope and a legacy of love. I'm going to open it up for questions, comments.
What did you do going on into this documentary? Did you just tell more of her life story? Or
Yeah. So I started by trying to find the voices that mattered of people who knew her and loved her. So some of that was interviewing, like these, using these cameras that we have set up. I set up one from each angle and just talk to them. And I prepared some questions in advance about her, characteristics about her, what challenges did she face, how did she overcome them, how did she influence their life, how did she deal with other people, etc. So I interviewed a lot of people, and I had a lot of video, probably 5-6 hours of video. That's the big challenge. You get a ton of material, and then you got to boil it all down. So then I had to categorize pieces of the video into chunks of her life. Service was a category. Another category was her dementia and death, the end of her life. Another category was her leadership capabilities. And so as I'd be going through these 10 different interviews, when somebody says something about leadership, I'd cut that piece and put it into a chunk. One of the great discoveries was my brother had an old video that my mom and my dad had done where they were flipping pictures. They did it through BYU Media Services or something. I don't even remember it. But they were flipping through family pictures and telling about it. And so I used my mom's voice. and the video was horrible. I couldn't use that, but I was able to duplicate, to find the pictures. And so I was, I flashed those in the screen. So right after this in the documentary is her voice saying, this is my mother, and here's my dad, and here's my grandpa, and they stopped the wagon train, for 45 minutes for him to be born. And she's telling the story. And the other treasure was I had an audio tape of her funeral, and her life sketch that was done by her sister was just choice. It was just a very beautifully done thing. And so I used my aunt's voice in that life sketch, and did video over it of things that, things she was talking about, places that she was, and so on. I was gathering a lot of photos. Again, this all happened in 6 weeks, but it's pretty much all I did for 6 weeks. I retired early for this reason, I'm sure. Other questions? Anything else?
At one of my family reunions, all my cousins were thinking all the adults were like telling stories and stuff. All those kids were in one of the trailers playing cards, and then my uncle was like, guys, all of you guys better head down to the fire, otherwise you're going to miss the fireside. They had planned the fireside with us, so every single one of the adults told stories of my great-grandpa. It was awesome because we found out that one of my cousins was related to my great-grandpa before he was alive.
And how did that make you feel, those family stories you were hearing?
I really liked it.
Did it stick with you? I mean, do you remember it? Do you remember the stories?
Some of them.
That's good. Yeah, no, that's a great example. Okay, anything else?
They say there's people designated in each family, so like he might be a genealogist.
I have a cousin. No, I have a cousin who, at your age, was doing family history research. He's now in charge of the Joel Hills Johnson Family History Association. So, Joel Hills Johnson wrote High on a Mountain Top. He was a famous poet. So, okay, thank you all.
Thank you.
Yes.